The resistance band truth no one told her. Her reflection stared back, arms tired, motivation fading, but something inside refused to quit. She didn't know yet that a simple latex band would change everything she believed about strength. Like most of us, she started with the best intentions. A home gym? No excuses. Just her, a mat, and a promise to finally feel strong. But every workout felt like guessing in the dark. Were these bands even doing anything real? She wasn't alone in that doubt. Millions of resistance bands sit in closets, barely touched, dismissed as too easy or beginner stuff. But what she didn't know, what most people never discover, is that these unassuming tools hide biomechanical secrets that most expensive machines can't replicate. The first time she felt it, she thought she was imagining things. A simple bicep curl with a band felt different than a dumbbell. Not weaker, different, like her muscles were working through honey instead of air. She didn't have the words for it yet, but her body was responding to something called accommodating resistance, a principle that elite athletes have quietly used for decades. Here's what happens inside your muscle when you pull a resistance band versus lifting a traditional weight. With dumbbells, gravity creates constant load. 10 pounds at the bottom equals 10 pounds at the top. Your muscle works hardest at its weakest point, usually the beginning, then coasts through the rest. But bands do something remarkable. They increase tension as you stretch them. So your muscle faces maximum resistance exactly when it's strongest, at peak contraction. Researchers at the University of Wisconsin found that this progressive tension activates significantly more muscle fibers throughout the entire range of motion. Your nervous system can't predict the load. It has to stay engaged, recruiting more motor units, creating what physiologists call continuous time under tension. That's the secret sauce. That's why her arms burned in ways barbells never achieved. But she almost gave up before discovering any of this. Part of her still doubted it could work. She'd been taught that real strength required iron and weight rooms. Bands felt like compromise, like settling. Then came the shoulder pain, and the real education began. She'd injured her rotator cuff years before. Nothing catastrophic, just that nagging ache that appears when you push too hard with free weights. Doctors told her to strengthen the stabilizer muscles. Physical therapists handed her those tiny therapy bands. She nodded, smiled, then forgot about them immediately. But now, stuck at home with only her beginner bands, she noticed something unexpected. Her shoulder didn't flare up, not once, even when she increased intensity, even when she tried movements that used to cause sharp twinges. What changed? The answer lies in something orthopedic specialists call vector variability. When you press a dumbbell overhead, gravity pulls straight down. Your shoulder joint must resist that vertical force, period. But bands pull at angles. You can position the anchor point anywhere. Suddenly your rotator cuff experiences diagonal resistance, horizontal tension, rotational load. Your stabilizer muscles wake up. They have to coordinate in 3 dimensions instead of fighting gravity alone. A study published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research compared band training to traditional weights for shoulder rehabilitation. The band group showed 37% faster recovery and significantly better functional movement patterns. Not because bands were easier, because they forced true stability through unpredictable tension. She laughed, realizing progress didn't always look like progress. Sometimes healing feels like nothing at all. What surprised her most wasn't just how resistance bands improved her experience with home fitness, but how everything started to feel different once she switched to the right method. She wasn't expecting such a clear change, and honestly, she tested it more than a few times before she figured out what really worked. This isn't a promotion, just sharing real results that made a noticeable difference for her. She'll leave the link below if you want to explore what she means. But here's where most people make the critical mistake. They buy one random band from a big box store and expect magic. She did too, and when that single band either felt too easy or snapped during a squat, she nearly quit altogether. The truth about resistance bands that fitness influencers rarely mention, quality variance, is staggering. Not all latex is created equal. Cheap bands use recycled rubber that degrades fast, loses elasticity, and breaks without warning. She learned this the hard way when a yellow band snapped mid-row and left a welt across her back. Premium bands, the kind used in physical therapy clinics and professional sports facilities, are made from natural Malaysian latex or layered synthetic compounds. They maintain consistent tension across thousands of uses. They don't chalk up or dry out, and they come with resistance ratings you can actually trust. That last part matters more than most realize. When a band says 20 pounds of resistance, what does that even mean? 20 pounds at what stretch distance? Most cheap bands have zero standardization. You're guessing. But professional-grade bands specify resistance at full extension, usually when the band is stretched to 2 or 3 times its resting length. That precision lets you progressively overload just like you would adding plates to a barbell. She bought a complete set, 5 bands ranging from 10 to 50 pounds equivalent resistance. Suddenly, her workouts transformed from random flailing to structured progression. She could track, she could measure, she could prove to herself that she was getting stronger. Sometimes, we only understand strength when it's tested, and testing herself became addictive in the healthiest way. Here's the biomechanical advantage nobody talks about. With free weights, momentum is the enemy. You can cheat reps by swinging, bouncing, using leverage, but bands penalize momentum. Try to jerk a band explosively, and it fights back, destabilizing your form. You're forced to control both the concentric and eccentric phases. Every inch of every rep demands neuromuscular coordination. This concept is called velocity-dependent resistance. The faster you try to move against a band, the more it resists. Olympic weightlifters and powerlifters use this principle, with bands attached to barbells to train explosive power while building deceleration strength. Your muscles don't just learn to push, they learn to brake, stabilize, and coordinate. She started noticing it outside the gym, carrying groceries, lifting her daughter, opening stubborn jar lids. Her functional strength skyrocketed because bands train movement patterns, not just isolated muscles. Her body learned to work as a system, but what happened next surprised even her. Somewhere between the failures and the quiet mornings, she found rhythm and peace. She began experimenting with movements impossible to replicate with dumbbells. Horizontal presses with the band anchored behind her, resisted sprints with the band around her waist. Anti-rotation holds that lit up her obliques in ways crunches never could. Every session felt like discovery. Then she learned about band stacking, using multiple bands simultaneously to create custom resistance curves. Need 40 pounds for squats, but only have a 20 and a 15. Combine them. Want to make the top of a pull-up harder, but keep the bottom manageable? Loop a band over the bar? The versatility was intoxicating. A biomechanist from the University of Southern California explained it best during a podcast she stumbled across. He said resistance bands democratize high-level training principles that used to require thousands of dollars in equipment. Accommodating resistance, variable tension, multidirectional loading. It's all accessible now for less than the cost of a single month's gym membership. What would you do in that moment, realizing you had everything you needed all along? She kept going deeper, learned that band color coding isn't universal. A red band from one brand might be 15 pounds, from another 30. So she stopped buying by color and started checking actual resistance specifications. She discovered loop bands versus tube bands with handles, flat therapy bands for rehab, figure 8 bands for leg work, mini bands for glute activation. Each tool served a purpose. Her favorite discovery was using bands for assisted movements. She'd never done a pull-up in her life, but by looping a thick band over the bar and kneeling into it, she could subtract body weight. Suddenly she was doing reps, real full-range pull-ups with assistance, and every week she used a slightly thinner band. Progress became tangible. Researchers at the National Strength and Conditioning Association found that progressive band-assisted training produces faster pull-up skill acquisition than negative-only training or machine-assisted variations. The band provides just enough help at the weakest point. The bottom of the movement then backs off as you reach the top, where you're naturally stronger. It teaches proper motor patterns instead of artificial support. Then came the injury and the real test. Not hers this time, but her husband's. Herniated disc, severe lower back pain. Doctors said no loaded spinal compression. No squats, no deadlifts, possibly never again. But bands don't compress the spine. They pull horizontally or at angles. His physical therapist prescribed band work exclusively for 6 months. Deadlift patterns, with the band anchored low. Good mornings with bands around his neck. Palaf presses for anti-rotation core stability. His back healed, and when he finally returned to barbells, he was stronger than before the injury, because his stabilizers had been forced to develop in ways traditional lifting neglected. She thought she understood bands by then, but watching her husband rebuild his body with nothing but elastic resistance taught her the deepest lesson. These aren't beginner tools. They're not substitutes or compromises. They're legitimate training instruments with unique biomechanical advantages that free weights simply cannot provide. Part of her wished someone had explained this years ago. All those gym memberships, all that equipment collecting dust in the garage, she could have been training effectively this whole time with $70 worth of bands and a door anchor. The science backs this up in ways that surprised even skeptical researchers. A meta-analysis published in the Scandinavian Journal of Medicine and Science in Sports compared resistance band training to traditional weight training across multiple studies. The conclusion? No significant difference in strength gains, muscle hypertrophy, or functional fitness outcomes when volume and intensity were matched. Bands produced identical results to barbells and machines, but with greater joint safety and lower injury rates. She laughed again, realizing how much marketing we've all swallowed. The fitness industry wants us to believe we need more. More equipment, more space, more money. But sometimes less becomes everything when you finally understand how to use it. Her favorite workout became the one she could do anywhere. Travel bands in her suitcase, park workout with a band around a tree, living room circuits between work calls. The freedom was intoxicating. No excuses, no dependencies. Just her and the physics of elastic tension. But she also learned the limitations. Bands won't replace everything. They're phenomenal for muscular endurance, joint stability, explosive power, and functional movement. But building maximum absolute strength, the kind that requires progressive overload into extremely heavy ranges, still favors barbells. You can't replicate a 400-pound deadlift with bands alone. Yet for most people, including her, that doesn't matter. She didn't need powerlifting numbers. She needed to feel strong, move well, stay injury-free, and train consistently without barriers. Bands delivered all of that, and more. When she looked in the mirror again, it wasn't her reflection that had changed. It was what she believed about herself. She'd spent years thinking she needed permission to be strong. Permission from trainers, from equipment, from some standard of what real training looked like. But standing there, band in hand, sweat on her brow, she realized strength was always hers to claim. The tool didn't matter as much as the intention behind it. A neuroscientist once explained that our brains create stronger neural pathways through novelty and challenge than through familiar repetition. Every time she changed band anchor points, adjusted resistance, or tried new movement angles, her nervous system had to adapt. That constant adaptation built resilience, not just in her muscles, but in her mind. She started teaching her daughter. Simple movements at first. Banded squats, chest presses, rows. But really, she was teaching something deeper. That you don't need a gym to be strong. That expensive equipment isn't the barrier. That consistency beats intensity every single time. Her daughter's face, focused, determined, proud, reflected back everything she'd learned. This is how traditions of strength get passed down. Not through intimidation or impossible standards, but through accessible tools and patient encouragement. The fitness world is slowly catching up to what physical therapists have known for decades. Bands belong in every serious athlete's toolkit, not as a backup plan, but as a primary training modality. Professional sports teams now travel with band systems instead of dumbbells. Tactical military units use bands for field conditioning. Even bodybuilders incorporate band work for muscle activation and joint health. What surprised researchers most wasn't that bands worked, but that they worked so consistently across populations. Elderly patients, elite athletes, post-surgical rehab, youth development. The same principles of accommodating resistance and continuous tension applied universally. She'd become part of something larger without realizing it. A quiet revolution happening in living rooms and hotel gyms and park benches worldwide. People reclaiming their fitness from institutions that gate-kept it for too long. Tell us what part of this story resonated most and where you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.